Ladies and gentlemen, speaking to you from Nashville, Tennessee.
This is Tyson Motsenbocker, and you're listening to the True Tunes Podcast.
Welcome back to the True Tunes Podcast. I'm John J. Thompson, and today we're excited to feature Tyson Motsenbocker, an artist who is defining a very new and exciting way to be successful in the music scene today. His brand of thoughtful, textured pop has found a growing audience around the world. His songs are brutally honest, often self-deprecating, frequently irreverent, and willing to confront issues like depression, anxiety, and doubt through catchy melodies, layered production, and engaging lyrical twists. With over 10 million streams under his belt and a sound that is both contemporary and classic, Motsenbocker seems to be defying the music industry odds on just about every front.
You wanna push it just a little, I knew you would. Top down, drive around the old neighborhood. You wanna make it sound simple, but things are only getting less sequential. She's gonna make me feel it, steal my t-shirt, desert dream girl, make me feel. She's gonna make me feel it, steal my t-shirt, desert dream girl, make me feel it, come on.
A little later in the show, we'll take a break and crank up the True Tunes Jukebox to take a listen to Revealer, the new album by another one of our favorite young artists who happens to be a friend and co-conspirator of Motsenbocker's, songwriter, singer, and guitarist Madison Cunningham.
What is wrong? Have you forgot I'm not a stranger? You're left-footed and headstrong, and the quiet turns me into a rambler. When it's all said and done, I'm not here looking for a fight, but if love is our rebellion, put me on the front lines.
It all gets rolling right after we take care of a little bit of housekeeping.
Hey, this is Ray, and I'm a Patreon backer of the True Tunes Podcast. I have also left a rating and review of the show at Apple Podcasts. Wasn't that hard? It didn't cost me anything. But this show means a lot to me, and I know that reviews and ratings make a big difference when it comes to how and if others discover these conversations. Would you take a few minutes, maybe even while you're listening, but please not while you're driving, to leave a rating and review? Even if you don't listen on Apple Podcasts, the reviews posted there push out to podcast platforms all around the world. Oh, and take some time to tell your friends about the show. Let's drive those numbers up together. Thanks.
Hey there, I'm Mark Feldbush, and I'm a Patreon backer of the True Tunes Podcast, and I follow and listen to the weekly Spotify Gallery Stage mixtape that John curates for us every week. I get to hear classic artists that I really dig and discover new artists. Every week, usually on Wednesdays, the mix is updated with around 40 songs from brand new releases to deep cuts and from across a wide range of genres including rock, Americana, indie, gospel, blues, sacred music, soul, and so much more. It's also great to hear a mix that blends up great music that is just good, beautiful, and true without all of the genre and market limitations and boxes I hear everywhere else. You can find the mix on the front page at truetunes.com or on the show notes page for this episode. And if you follow it, it will live there in your Spotify browser and update automatically each week. And don't miss the massive archive list where all previous lists get saved. And as great as Spotify is for music discovery, please support the artists you love once you hear and discover them there. Thanks.
feels like, but I was already rusted through. I tried to love you. I tried to love you.
I've been a fan of Tyson Motsenbocker's music since I first heard him several years ago. We talked about having him on the show back when we first launched, but COVID shut us down. But Tyson recently stopped in Nashville to support his latest album, Milk Teeth, and we were finally able to get together in person at the Well Koinonia Coffee Shop on Music Row. If you are new to his music, well, get ready to meet a new friend. Tyson Motsenbocker is the real deal. We're here in person.
Yeah.
And it feels long overdue because right when I was getting the podcast started was about the time I first started hearing your music. But then this pandemic and all this stuff kind of slowed everything down. So it's great to have you here in person here at the Well on Music Row, this kind of historic spot. And thank you for making time for us.
Yeah, I'm glad to be here.
And you're from the Pacific Northwest originally, San Diego now, but originally the Northwest?
Yep. So I grew up in what's called the inland Northwest. So everything that's like east of the mountains there.
Okay.
Yeah.
And that's an area that's definitely associated, at least in the alternative music world, with a lot of great music.
Yeah.
How did that impact you as a kid? How aware of the musical legacy of the Northwest were you?
Yeah, very much so. I mean, it's the Northwest is like completely separated from the rest of the country. It's like this. It's a totally isolated place up there. It's not really that much unlike living in Alaska or Hawaii culturally, because there's all this space between Seattle and Los Angeles or Seattle and Denver or whatever. It's just like space. So I think what that does culturally or musically, and you can hear it in all the bands that have come out of there, is that it always feels like kind of two steps removed from the rest of the music industry a little bit, or like what's going on everywhere else. And part of that is because I think that there's a real rugged individualism that happens with living there. So I think part of it is like this resistance to doing what other people are, what is successful. It feels almost impossible. And so I think it actually lends people to doing something that's, maybe less likely to be commercially successful, but really likely to be super true to what they want to be doing.
One of the things I remember hearing about as the Seattle sound, the grunge sound kicked off was it rains constantly here, so you're inside and you might as well play music or something. Like you're going to either play video games or you're going to play music. Do you think that the atmosphere, the gloominess, the constant rain, do you buy that had an effect on the sound of the Pacific Northwest?
Without question. I mean, and I think the Pacific Northwest in general, I mean, you don't have Elliott Smith in LA or whatever. Like, he had to be born in, I mean, he lived there later, but he had to be born he had to be born in the Northwest to sound the way that he did. There's also like an incredible amount of like tension and release in the Northwest. Like the spring and the summer in the Northwest is like nothing you've ever seen. Everything is bright green and there's water everywhere and it's sunny and it comes on the back of these just like devastatingly brutal winters. In Seattle, it's just rainy the whole time. Like where I grew up on the east side, it's like, it's like living in Alberta. It's like, it's freezing cold and the snow, it snows in November and then it stays frozen brown snow on the ground until April. Nature is very unforgiving in the Northwest. So I think that like that does drive people inside. It like kind of heightens emotions. There's a reason why I think like the music in the Northwest tends to be like pretty emotionally wrought. It's like pretty like heavy subject matter. And the people that are championed are people that like really, Cobain and Elliott Smith and like even like Death Cab for Cutie or something, like these bands that come out of there, they tend to embody that and they sound like the weather. Like I've actually said before that like even to this day, like I always joke that I don't play in Florida which of course I will. And
Like, just you don't do concerts in Florida?
Yeah, that I don't tour in Florida. And I have like people there that like what I do, and I always have a lovely time there. But Florida to me feels like the antithesis of what I make, because it's, you know, it's sort of sunny, and it's like it's a different type of escapism than happens in the Northwest. And I always joke that like when I'm on tour, people that have to be inside in the winter, those have always been the people that understood what I was doing first.
Yeah. And coming up in Chicago, I mean, it was winter, you know, 10 months out of the year, it felt like.
Totally.
And so it did have that exaltation of the first time you could put your window down in your car.
Yeah.
Like you're just, you wanted to scream. You were so excited. We did it. We survived.
We made it through the winter. Yeah.
And then also that cool feeling of foreboding in October, like that, oh, it's coming again. You know, like, is it going to get us?
Well, or like living in California where I live now, which is that like, I literally, like, there were probably like 6 or 7 years that passed where I didn't realize this, but there was like something in me that was like, it felt like time had stopped. And I had a really hard time with it, where I was like, I couldn't figure out why I felt so paused in my life and stuff. It was because there was none of that like tension and release, like the narrative of the seasons. Right. And I was like 3 years in, I was like, we just got here. And I was like, this is 3 years ago. It's because it was like, it's one day, you know, it's always 70 degrees and sunny, and it's a nice place to live. But it's like, I think it's actually really not super positive for your brain, like to think like, oh, like it's good for you, like sleeping and waking, and you know, like all these cycles are important.
Is it such a bad idea being brave? We're wearing our own skin to the fray. If it's not worth risking everything, I would say that it wasn't worth having anyway. Where the pine trees turned to palms, I was wondering, could we belong in a big world that we don't understand? I still believe that we will find our way. I want you to come to California.
So when did you decide that you needed to dive into that musical world as a participant and a creator, and not just as a consumer, not just going to shows, but actually making it yourself? When did that hit you?
Growing up in the Northwest, like there was never anybody that made it out, really. You know, there were tons of bands, but like it was rare, so rare for somebody like hit mainstream success. Sometimes
because now you're coming up a generation after that whole grunge thing, where everybody seemed to be getting a deal and making it out, and then that window kind of closed, and so now you're coming up. Yeah. Post all of that.
Even the grunge stuff, though, it's like nowadays, like, I mean, there were people that were getting huge deals and stuff like that. The Seattle sound thing, like the Gen X, the big, like the Seattle explosion, that was like kind of the first moment I think that Seattle was even on the map. I mean, it was like both Seattle and Portland were like dingy little port towns. You know, there was nothing there really. Like my world was all indie rock. So it was like well post grunge, you know, like early 2000s. And especially talking like regionally, like regional scene. And there were a lot of folk people and indie rock bands. And those bands would make it out occasionally, but it still was this thing where it felt like a miracle, you know? Yeah. Like when, and also that was also around the time where like there was a big wrestling match happening between like the idea of selling out and being like a cred band or somebody that was to be respected,
right? And
then mainstream. And that's like when, like, in fact, like you can kind of trace a lot of like the cultural stuff in Seattle to that show, The OC. Oh, really? Because The OC happened, which was like, you know, as mainstream as it gets. But one of the main characters on that show, he was like, all of his favorite bands were indie rock bands. So he had like a Death Cab poster on his wall, and they were playing all these bands from Seattle and Portland and stuff and like BC, Canada, on the show. And then those bands all went on to get like, you know, Ford ads and stuff. And so it was this thing where like, but those were like the cool, like really like respected bands.
Decemberists and
Yeah.
Fleet Foxes and that kind of era.
Totally. This is a band called The Long Winters that
Oh, yeah.
I like a lot, and Tegan and Sarah and the New
Right.
Pornographers and kind of like all that stuff.
Right.
So when that started happening, I just remember thinking like, well, even like maybe like indie rock isn't a thing. Like as an indie rock band, you could like have a regional success. But I just never thought it was possible. I just thought like you're either, you know, you live in LA and you make pop music, or you have a freak Ford commercial as an indie band, and that's like kind of that's the extent of the music industry as a kid that grew up in like rural Washington.
Did you lose your way? Did you ever have one when you came around? Sleeping in the basement and the credit cards, holding break-top shotguns, just a fox dug down, running out of options. Horizon bend in the tourist season, go and swim around, drinking Polynesians. Then you woke one day on a turn toward 40, where the seasons never changed, at your North Shore party.
Did you have a sense of even what making it, or did you have a sense of a goal? Because that idea of selling out seems to imply that there is something to sell. There's a goal, there's a point to all of this. It always seemed interesting that, what do you guys want? Do you want fame? Do you want recognition? Do you want to make money at this, or do you want obscurity? Did you have a sense of what artists were after at that point, or a purpose behind any of that?
That's a really good point. I mean, like, to me, it always felt like, even as a kid, I never wanted to be rich and famous. Like, and that was a pretty frowned upon thing in the Northwest too. It was like
success in general, that kind of was
that level of success. Like like everybody was sort of like, the goal was always like to basically be like a college professor level of success, where like people respected you, and they saw what you did and its value and place in the world. But you didn't want to be like, you know, you didn't want to be a Kardashian or something. Like, that was a ridiculous idea. Right. And so even like the idea of making it in music, the way that I thought about it was like, either you're U2 or you're starving. You know, it's like you're playing for 6 people in a coffee shop, and there was no middle ground. And so for me, it was like, well, I don't really want to be U2. And also I don't think I could be, like, that's not what I do. And there was no idea, like, there wasn't really the idea of like a blue collar artist that happened like a lot later. Like, they're like with Pedro the Lion or these people that were like, they're basically like either teacher salary or like dentists.
Well, and it also, I mean, functionally, a lot of that stuff seemed to have come out post 2006, 2007, 2008, when things like Kickstarter and Pledge Music and Indiegogo, there were these mechanisms where artists were, because there had been the mp3.com Napster moment of music is free, and the major labels are freaking out trying to stop that dam from breaking, and they can't. That was how that era of indie music, that all of a sudden you could think, well, maybe these people will buy a t-shirt, maybe they'll book us to play. Right. But that mechanism hadn't existed before that.
Yeah, it was a democratization of music, and it was like also a toppling of these, like, because that was the other thing too, was that and this is like, even to this day, it's like the thing that always has been so frustrating is whenever there's somebody in charge. It's like there's somebody, the gatekeeper idea, right? And I remember like as a kid being like, well, nobody at Interscope or whatever is going to want to put my, you know, weird storyteller song on a, you know, they're not going to give me a major label deal or whatever. So I was like, I guess I just shouldn't try. And then when that happened, I was like, oh, people can just find you and they can just like it. And there's kind of an audience for everyone if you do it well. And that was kind of the first time where these lights started going off. In fact, like when I started playing music I moved to California. I was going to work for a booking agency in the music industry. That was going to be my job. Oh. And then that booking agency went away. And then I just like moved to California with some friends because I just wanted to like go surfing basically. And I worked at a coffee shop and surfed all the time. And then I was making like $400 a week at Starbucks working there. And I was like, well, I can make this like that's I feel like I can make this money like doing something different. And then I started getting hired playing guitar in bands and bass in touring bands. And then I was doing that for like years before I realized like, oh, I'm doing it. Like I would tour my own records and I would go and do it. I'd like play at camp sometimes, and then I would go and play bass or guitar in a band that was going on tour. And it was like 2 or 3 years into it where I was like, I was like, oh, I guess this is just what it is. Like I'm kind of doing it.
Right.
And that was part of that was also too like moving to a place like California where there is industry and there are a lot of bands and there are a lot of shows and there's a lot of people doing cool stuff.
We made plans for the world, thinking we stay the same. Burn like Moses' bush where the leaves don't change. Our lives were the dust, just the dust in the light. In the last
Who were some of the bands that you were playing with that kind of you cut your teeth on?
That I was playing with down there?
Yeah.
I was in a band called Lowly Specs, who the lead singer is actually Nashville Songwriter of the Year here in town. His name is Ethan Hulse. He's he was the lead singer in that band. I was a pretty bad bass player in that band.
But I bet you learned some stuff.
Learned so much. Yeah, and that actually that all of the guys in that band are on doing really cool stuff now. The four of us were kind of like, I remember actually like the four of us one time we played at the Fox Theater, which I think is in like Orange or something. And we were playing this private like event at the Little Room, and all four of us went down and stood like on the big stage in the Fox Theater, and we all stood there, and like we all went to like where we would be standing or whatever, and we're like, maybe one day we'll like do something like this, you know. And it's cool to see now like where everyone's gone on to do, and like I've played that. I opened a show at that theater since, and you know, Ethan the singer is like, you know, he's got like a bunch of Grammy nominations and stuff, so it's fun to see that stuff happen.
Who else did you play with before you went solo?
A couple of them were like really, really weird bands that like would play at like high schools and stuff. Mm-hmm. I did that for a little while. There was one that was like doing Christian like worship music at high schools.
Interesting.
Which was in fact, like a lot of my songs that have dealt with like kind of evangelicalism and American, like especially like right wing culture and how that plays with, like kind of Christianity came from watching that happen. Cause it was like, I'd be playing guitar or whatever, or bass, and we'd be like, basically they'd book, this band to come play, you know, at their high school. And it's like these massive Christian high schools in LA and Orange County and up in the Bay Area. And also too, like a lot of those people were really lovely people and really great hearts. And a lot of them like taught me a lot, but a lot of it was not that way. Right. And it was really dark, but they would like pay a lot of money and to this one guy specifically who was still a friend of mine. And we would go and do these things. So that was part of it. It was like, and then the other side of it was playing, like it was this total split in my life, because one half of it was playing like these really conservative Christian high schools and camps, and then the other half was like going on tour with like indie rock bands that were like just on like doing pounds of blow every night and tripping on mushrooms on stage and stuff. So it was like it was a very unique time.
And then having to sit
life.
there and go, I wonder which of these is more messed up.
Well, that's actually the last record. I have this song called Sunday Morning, which is where I realized like,
I was thinking that's probably where that came from.
Yeah. Which is me saying that like, oh my gosh, my friends that are on drugs, they're acting the same way as my friends that are like at leading church camp, because it's like this endorphin rush and like, aren't these supposed to be different things? And, I've been thinking about this a lot lately, but there's this author I like named Neil Gaiman, who's like you're a fan. Yeah.
Oh yeah.
And he said this thing that I just think is so fascinating. He said that like ideas come from confluence, like two rivers coming together. Mm-hmm. And I love that a lot, because, you know, it's like, that's what I found is that like, if you've got idea A, which is its own thing, and then you've got idea B which is its own thing, that's like where the new idea comes from. And it's like, and I pay attention to that a lot. If it's like, this thing feels like this thing, I wonder why that is. Like when you sense connections in the world, it's like, why do these things feel the same? It's because there's a third thing there that you can find.
I chose all the right songs, played all the right chords, till the kids still weren't singing praise the Lord. And the pastor yelled about faith and hell, and I soundtracked his words for effect, while everyone cried and cried and cried. Everyone cried and cried and cried. And then we played kickball.
I want to go back just again a little bit to when you first start writing songs.
Yeah.
Is it picking up a guitar and kind of emulating some of those Pacific Northwest songwriters? Is it playing in indie rock bands up in the Northwest? What was the first kind of impetus or artists or that you were saying, okay, I want to actually do this? I think I kind of missed that.
Yeah. Well, I still have like a pretty significant learning disability, like a really pretty severe ADD. And so as a kid, I was just kind of like off the walls. And my mom, who was kind of a genius, she figured out that like the only way that she could get me to not be a giant nuisance or like menace to society was to find little places for me to disappear into, little worlds that I could disappear into, because I had a really active imagination. And so like we would go to the library every Sunday, and she'd get like 8 books for me, and I read all 8 of them, like these like you know like the Hardy Boys and the Boxcar Children and all that, like these mystery novels for kids. Right. And I would just pour through those, and it was actually to a point where like it was a problem, because I would read every series that there was for kids. And then she figured out that if she gave me a guitar, I could kind of like, I would just go and do that for hours. And so I mean, I put a song into like a poetry contest when I was in the 4th or 5th grade. I mean, like there's never really been a time where I haven't been writing songs, just because it was like kind of a place that my mom could send me where I wouldn't be a problem. And then I started a band when I was in middle school with like a drummer and a guy that played piano, and we like played Wonderwall at an assembly, and it's kind of just always been a part of my life. And a lot of it was that I would write these. It's interesting to watch the way that it's gone, but it was always narrative based. Like all of my songs were stories. Because that's the way that my brain worked with books, was like you have a start and you have a character and you have a setting, and then you know there's a conflict or whatever, and then it resolves.
Well, and as Gaiman was talking about with those confluence, poetry is language and music kind of coming together into creating something new, even if there's not melody involved. Right. There's a musicality to poetry. So it would make sense to me that your brain would go towards poetry, and then you would express poetry through music. It's a new thing, but even as a little kid, your brain is decoding the world in a certain way. So,
well, and the thing that I liked about poetry too, which was something that like I actually ended up like studying all this stuff in college later, but the thing that I liked about it as a kid was that it didn't have to mean like that. The musicality of the words and the cadence to it, and the imagery has always been really important to me. Like if I can't see something, it loses me pretty quick. It's actually why I like books and stuff more than I like movies, because I like if the movie is like showing me what it's supposed to look like, and I'm like, I don't think it should look like that, right? And that's harder for me to follow. So with poetry, it was always like I could read a poem, you know, and I could get to the end of it, and it was actually really freeing, because I didn't have to follow it like I did the Lord of the Rings or something. It was just supposed to make you feel some way. And I get to the end of it, and I was like, why do I feel this way? Why did it make me feel this way? And it was like, because these words mean, you know, like these words mean loss, and these words mean discovery. Right. And even if I don't know what the person's saying, I can feel it. And that was important for me to say, like, okay, if I can take this idea of narrative that I'm getting from like literature, and I can figure out how to invoke meaning and feeling in my words, like that was really where it all started. And the music kind of followed that, to be honest. It always has for me.
I think I want you to text me some more. Maybe just one more month. Keep your words to myself for a while. Blindside Guess I still have your words if I can. If you gotta feel free, I suppose that too. 'Cause I can talk alright, you can talk alright, we can talk all night.
Around the time I think you first came onto my radar, I think you had just walked 600 miles. I think maybe your mom had just passed away recently, and then you went on a long walk, and then a lot of songs came out of that. It's been a while since I heard that. Am I remembering that?
That's
right?
exactly right. So my mom passed away, and she was, for obvious reasons, she was like kind of the one that got me through my whole adolescence and young adulthood, because she could find ways for me to succeed when I wasn't matched well for school and everything else. And so when she passed away, it was a pretty life-altering moment. Because
And how old were you when she passed?
26, I think, something like that.
And you were already in California at this point? Okay.
Yeah. I mean, when she was sick, so I was like kind of going back and forth from the Northwest a bunch at the end there, which was interesting because, like, to go back to seasons, it was always I always came back in the fall. And so it was like the first time where it felt like my life was changing, where like it felt like a chapter was changing, because it was like I could feel the air getting cold and I could watch the frost coming in the morning and stuff. So yeah, she passed away. And then what I did is there's this road called the El Camino Real, which is, it's the King's Road when the Spanish kind of colonized California. And it goes from this guy named Junipero Serra, who is a Franciscan monk, and he built all the original missions in California. So a lot of the towns are like even named after his missions and stuff. And they're all 20 miles from each other. So it starts in like Tijuana and it goes up to San Francisco. And the missions are all 20 miles apart because that's a day's walk. So it was a walking road, like the Pilgrim's Road, in Spain. It's the same idea, but it's been paved over. It was paved over 100 years ago, and nobody's walked it since. And so I had this idea to do that kind of in her memory, to like reset my life. And so I walked I didn't do it exactly, like I kind of went off route and stuff, but it doesn't even really exist anymore, so it doesn't matter totally. But I went from San Diego to San Francisco and walked basically along the freeways and the beach and stuff it took me 40 days, which was an accident. It was totally an accident. I didn't plan that. And I wrote my first record on that, a lot of my first record on that walk. I had some of the songs already, and it dealt with all these themes, a lot of dealing with God and with being let down by institutions and loss and moving forward and all these types of things. So I did that walk, and then that was actually like, cause I was, I was playing in other bands, and then I was touring, but I was playing like tiny little coffee shops and stuff wherever somebody would let me play. And when I was on that walk, John Foreman from Switchfoot heard about it, and then he thought it was cool, cause that's the kind of thing that he likes. And he asked me to go on tour, and that was the first kind of like time that anyone had taken notice of me at all. And then John asked me to go on tour, and then I got a number of different record labels interested.
Down the coast, down in Little Mexico, is where I hide from your disease. My little sister moved back home from the city, and it rained and rained and rained. You told me dying is not what people think, not like the endings in the books we love to read. It's more like finding that the sky will meet the sea with no line in between. I still need you. I still need you.
So was there always a kind of a spiritual background happening in your life? Was that also a part of your childhood and your relationship with your parents and stuff?
Sort of. So neither of my parents grew up that way. My parents are really interesting people. My dad was a trapeze artist in the circus. And like a ski.
And that's not a metaphor. That's like
he was literally he was a flyer on the trapeze.
That's fantastic.
And my mom was this like, you know, they met. My dad was working for an ambulance company. My mom was a nurse, and they met like giving this guy CPR on a gurney, and then they went rock climbing the next day and did like a 6-pitch rock climb. And my mom rode her bike from Seattle to Boston alone when she was 22. So they're just like these like really adventurous kind of like they're really incredible. Like both of my parents had their dive masters, scuba licenses, their sailing captain's licenses, and their pilot's licenses. So
oh my goodness,
it was a very that my parents are not like a safe people.
Right.
I like they're wild people, and also like you wouldn't think so. You know, my dad's like a superintendent of a school district now, or as he was until he retired. He's a quiet guy, and my mom was a very thoughtful, peaceful person. But they had this like fire of like adventure in them, and always had. And so both of them, my mom actually like met this traveling like evangelist guy in Australia. She was riding her bike across the outback, and she met this guy in the outback, and he told her about Jesus, and she was like, "This doesn't sound like anybody else has ever talked about Jesus, because it's like this thing that's full of like bigness." And my dad, basically, then she married my dad, and it took my dad a few years, and then he was kind of like, "This seems cool." And so it was like it's a faith that is extremely separated from everything that I kind of ended up growing up in, which is this like evangelicalism, and so I grew up with it. Also, like when we lived in Haiti when I was a little kid, working at this hospital that was part of a Methodist mission. Mm-hmm. So in some ways we were like kind of missionaries, but not really, because like there was a war going on, and my mom just worked in the emergency room, and my dad like kept the generator going.
I came to this town to escape my pain, but I'll end up leaving the same way that I came, 'cause I'm always blindest, surrounded by friends, the comfort and the shelter that I find in the end. 'Cause I'll be waiting when we're older, and all my motives are showing shoulder, and I know I can't find the things for which I'm searching in the places that I still have to go.
It kind of seems like, in some ways, the kind of Jesus movement that you hear about from the 60s and stuff, the radical, life-altering, just when it's apart from institutions and politics and power and lifestyle stuff and culture wars, when it's people just making these radical decisions to lay down their life and follow in a very dangerous path, which sounds like something your parents were predisposed to do because of their personality. They were doing this dangerous thing that was radical,
totally
not a culture war kind of comfortable thing, which is to go with the flow of, you know, so that's pretty amazing. That seems like a huge blessing to have that in your background. So, but you say at some point it kind of, you're saying you found yourself kind of in a more institutional sort of setting.
Yeah, I mean, well, I think that's the thing that's so interesting about it, is that it's like, you know, it's like all rivers sort of lead to the sea a little bit, you know. It's this thing where like it's human nature, for one thing, you know, to sort of like gather in places that are comfortable, and places that are like institutionalized and like systematized, and a lot of those times the system sort of like eclipses everything that was exciting about it to begin with, you know. So that's kind of like what I found was that like like the wildness and bigness of the thing that I think drew my mom specifically to it. I actually just like wrote a book about a lot of this stuff in my walk and stuff, that's getting published next year. But
oh wow,
which is one of the reasons why it's all like kind of right on the end of my front of my mind. But
is the book have a title yet?
Yeah, it's called Where the Waves Turn Back. It's about about like walking along the beach where the waves are flipping back and going back out to the ocean again. So I think that like actually like my teenage years, when we just like went to church. You know, it was like my mom was like, well, I guess we found Jesus, and now what you do is you go to church, and then you like go to the retreat or whatever. And those were actually like, for me, it was like, I was like, this is cool because I have a learning disability and I can run around with other kids and like, you know, like throw Nerf balls at each other or whatever. And my mom was like in turmoil. Right. And I remember watching that happening where like we would drive home and my mom would be quizzing my dad on the sermon or whatever. And she would be mad about it. And she'd be like, I don't understand why this is like, because I think she just was sensing this schism in herself between like the wildness that drew her to it and then the safeness of the place that they landed. And so, you know, my dad would just sort of be like, I don't know what to tell you. It's just like, I guess it's just right there in the Bible type thing, you know? And so there was this conflict happening there. Which she fought that until she died. You know, she was like, in fact, like the pastor that did her memorial service was like, he basically said from the pulpit, like, it was in a gym, but he's like, I know, he's like, I think a lot of you guys don't think, my mom's name was Jeannie. He's like, I know a lot of you guys probably don't think that Jeannie was a Christian. They're like kind of calling them all out type of thing. Cause she was like pretty, you know, she was like kind of a burr in the saddle a little bit, you know. She like was not going like quietly into that good night, and I think that was something that that's something that has been instilled in me a little bit.
I tried, I made a moment of it all night. Another 100 miles, stay alive. I found it, can't come home again, no. 'Cause I tried, I made a moment of it all night. Another 100 miles, stay alive. I found that you can't come home again, no. You can't go home again, no. Can't come home again, no.
We're going to step away from this conversation for just a bit. Bruce is warming up the True Tunes Jukebox, and we'll have a special new album for you right after this quick break.
Hi, I'm Bill Keith, and I'm a Patreon backer of True Tunes. The show is really important to me, and I know that the money I contribute each month goes a long way toward helping with the cost associated with producing and distributing a show of this caliber. And yes, the rewards are cool too. We get early access to new episodes that we can download in a higher quality audio format, as well as invites to exclusive backers-only Zoom hangs and some special swag and stuff. There are multiple levels you can join at, and every gift helps. Check out patreon.com/TrueTunes for more information on how to join me and the rest of the Patreon tribe. And thanks for considering a gift. It really will make a difference.
True Tunes is on the road. I've been to Indiana, California, Tennessee, Iowa, and Illinois so far, and we are currently looking at opportunities around the country. These conversations have been a lot of fun, with me bringing a turntable and some records and a guitar, and often finding artists or other special guests to join me. I've also done songwriting workshops, music business clinics, and even some conversations about how we can slow ourselves down and listen to music more carefully, more thoughtfully, and yes, more spiritually. So, from auditoriums to small groups, there's kind of something for everyone. You can follow all of the action at truetunes.com/events, and if you would be interested in having me come speak in your neck of the woods, drop me a line at jjt@truetunes.com and let me know. I'm also excited to be aligning with the Porchlight Network for house shows. Porchlight is a growing network of house show venues around the country, and you can learn more at porchlight.art. So, for house shows, look me up at Porchlight. For schools, venues, churches, or other opportunities, just connect with me directly. And hopefully, I'll be seeing you out there in person.
What do I know? What do I own that will not fade away? All things fade away. Where will I be? The fruit and the tree
We've been raving about young Madison Cunningham since we started this conversation 3 years ago. And if you've been listening to our weekly Spotify mix, you've heard something from her just about every week since I started pulling it together, even before we launched the show. Her combination of innovative melodic sensibility, lyrical introspection, guitar prowess, and an ability to somehow sound both incredibly hip and somehow anchored to the best traditions of classic rock, blues, and folk has enchanted me as a fan, challenged me as an artist, and thrilled me as someone committed to digging for signs of life in a darkening culture.
At the table of our Savior, no mouth will fail. Children in the shadows, streaming rays there. Oh, give us ears to hear them, and give us eyes that see. For there is one who loves them. I am his hands and feet. For there is one who loves them. I am his hands and feet.
Although Cunningham has released a steady stream of singles and EPs and has appeared as a collaborator with numerous artists, she hasn't released a full-length album since her proper debut, 2019's Who Are You Now? That album was nominated for a Best Americana Album Grammy and made my Best of 2019 list.
Well, I left for the city with the strength and the will to compete. And how quickly you forget that just anyone can fill your seat. Oh, doesn't it feel good to laugh at yourself, turn your back on the business, and leave it to sell its own worry, its own worry. I've been looking alive. I've been looking alive.
She did nab a Grammy nomination for Best Folk Album for the expanded edition of her Wednesday EP, a collection of brilliant covers by artists like Radiohead, Jeff Buckley, The Beatles, and Rufus Wainwright.
They hung up a sign in our old town. If you live it up, you'll never live it down. So she left him on a Rio sun. Just like a bullet leaves a gun. With her chocolate eyes and her Monroe hips, she went and took that California trip. Oh, the moon was gold and her hair like wind. She said, don't look back, just come on, Jim. Oh, you gotta hold on, hold on.
Now comes Revealer, a collection she has been unveiling slowly over the last several months. It feels like forever since we've had a full-length Madison Cunningham album to dive into, and with music this enveloping and rewarding, that is exactly what albums are for. Revealer is a rich, challenging, sophisticated, and virtuosic collection that is never ponderous, never self-important, and just indulgent enough to make me glad to own a good set of headphones.
Passenger van to Ohio, the cries Tesla invention hums and blows. Warm air through the vents sends it straight to the bone. Outside it's 9 below. It's a pain I've never known.
The album's opening cut pulls us right in with an arpeggiated chord riff that instantly reinforces what is rapidly becoming a defining aspect of Cunningham's trademark guitar style. She blends rhythmic and melodic elements into cascading layers and then allows sinewy melodies to escape in ways that recall jazz jams, prog rock improvisation, and psychedelic wonderment as much as they do anything in the Americana or folk rock realm. Some research reveals that while the amazing Tyler Chester may be sitting in the producer's chair on this track, Cunningham herself is playing every instrument, every note, every vocal track, and she composed the song on her own.
Will you take me as I came in this resistance to the sound of my name? I'm a daughter to the mystery, but a servant to the strain. Will I see you again? Will I know what to say? Will I know what to say? Will I know what to say? You're all I've ever known. You're all I've ever known. You're the only thing that I know, and I'm afraid of what I don't know. You're all I've ever.
The lyric cleverly and revealingly confesses to the sort of upside-down world a young full-time musician often calls home, and suggests that for those with ears to hear, this set of songs may offer a more personal and, yes, revealing perspective than Cunningham's previous work has. It really is incredible to hear the kinds of guitar parts Cunningham can turn into riffs. She is an incredible guitar player in the same way artists such as Lindsey Buckingham or Mark Knopfler are exceptional, in that they use their dexterity with the instrument to find new ways to play it. It's not that they can't shred. I'm sure Madison could bury just about any jam band slinger if given a chance. But that doesn't seem to excite her nearly as much as finding a widely melodic phrase that strays far beyond the confines of a standard minor pentatonic scale, playing it with enough of a rhythmic pattern for it to become a hook, and then hanging a cascading melody around that hook like garland.
The fall I can't be reasoned with.
On Hospital, the riff is solid enough to land on classic rock radio if given the chance, whereas on Anywhere, the riff and the jazzy rhythm behind it is more akin to something one might imagine Joni Mitchell playing if she was backed up by Stuart Copeland for a gig.
Any day now, I'll find myself free of it. You turn and see me there, and to answer to no. Any day now, I'll smile in the face of it, and you'll say you'd rather me anywhere.
Revealer packs a ton of range into its considerable grooves as well. The emotional centerpiece of the set is clearly Life According to Rachel, a gorgeous homage to a lost grandmother.
It's not if, darling, it's when there's always something left unsaid, or your eyes green, were they blue? What was it that I forgot to ask you? God me in his band. When this world and its people all we have.
Besides having one of the best song titles, lyrical concepts, and opening rhythmic riffs ever, Your Hate Could Power a Train stretches the edge of prog rock alt pop to the breaking point, serving the underlying lyrical theme of the unhealthy use of power to dominate and control others perfectly. Listen for the Jeff Lynne-esque break in the manic clouds when the protagonist declares her freedom from the relentless momentum of the bully's abusive, toxic power.
Examine the frame of the mind and its suffering, but no one can say how someone reclaims a little autonomy, sold it to the land, tossed it like seed, saw it grow hands and fold me underneath. What does it say about you? Your hate could power a train. And what does it say about me? Your love could get away.
It's interesting to see the music press and industry try to comprehend and categorize Cunningham's sound. Is it indie pop, Americana, alternative rock, folk? Probably yes. Trying to limit an artist as imaginative, talented, and willing to defy easy branding as Cunningham to one genre will likely require more hyphens than a journalist should use without a special permit. Fortunately, these days, people can just listen for themselves and decide what they think it is. and I'm not sure to whom I can compare Madison Cunningham when it comes to the comprehensive nature of her skill and artistry. She is an exceptionally imaginative and accomplished guitar player and composer. She is a wonderful vocalist, one of the most expressive new singers to come on the indie music scene in the last several decades. To top it all off, she integrates all of this seamlessly, incorporating a hard-won level of spiritual, emotional, and cultural perspective that most of the best songwriters don't manage to approach until they have reached their 40s or 50s. Madison Cunningham is 26. Honestly, friends, she really is something special.
Good girl, got some bad in her, cussing like a drunk, driving with her knees quarter to quarter, dealing with the torture of living hard and not feel low, spending more and not feel broke.
Like most soon-to-be classics, Revealer gets better with repeated listens. It's perfectly enjoyable at a surface level, but dig in and notice the subtle ear candy and the carefully crafted lyrical gems tucked between the grooves.
When did war become sensible and love unfair? Well, neither one will give you the time to prepare. But this dance comes naturally once you put your feet there. Who are you now? Who are you now? Who are you
Okay, the jukebox is making that melty smell again, so we better let her cool off a bit. We'll get back to our conversation with Tyson Motsenbocker right after this.
Hello, my name's Rob, and I'm one of the Patreon backers of the True Tunes podcast. I'm honored to invite you to join me in support of True Tunes by signing up on their email list. I know email is often annoying, but by being on the list, I get notified when new episodes drop and when new articles get posted at truetunes.com. Sometimes, John even sends out short notes and gives away records and swag and stuff. Super cool. But really, the point is that by staying directly connected, I know that they don't have to pay Facebook or anyone else in order for me to hear from them, and that's important. They don't send out too many emails either, and I'm always happy to get them. So really, it would be helpful if you join me over here. You can find the sign-up link on the front page at truetunes.com. Oh, and don't forget to add John's email address, jjt@truetunes.com, to your contacts so that the emails don't get caught in your spam filter. And if you have any feedback on the show or questions, you can email him and he'll get back to you. Eventually. Thanks for listening.
Back to the well with Tyson Motsenbocker.
Someday I'll make it all up to you. Someday I'll make it all up to you.
I want to kind of touch on the last record a little bit since we didn't get a chance to talk about that, and it feels like it might get skipped over because it came out right when the world shut down. That record became a companion to me. I had a lot of time walking in a really lovely park right behind my house here in East Nashville. And there's a big difference, I think, in the songs on that record. You seem to be tackling things, more issues. And I'm not saying that this is not a critique, just an observation that record you seem to be noticing some things and commenting on some stuff. How did you find your voice on that set of songs, and how did that project kind of sit? And then you had 2 years to sit with it, wondering what's going on.
That record's really wild to look back on because
and by the way, that record, the title of it is called Someday I'll Make It All Up to You.
Yeah.
Which I always was kind of like, well, what did you do?
My friend always says the question is it. What's it?
Yeah. Right.
He always asks me, what is it? That record is really interesting now because if I look at it, it does feel, it came out on Valentine's Day 2020, so like right before things happened. And I was on tour that whole time until we got sent home. And it's really an interesting thing because it came out before, like if you listen to that record, it feels like a record that's about COVID.
Exactly.
But it came out before COVID. I mean, even like I Miss the Old Days Too came out like, which is a song about racism.
Yeah.
It came out, like 6 weeks before George Floyd.
Right.
So, and we were actually on tour in Minneapolis like a week before that happened.
I miss the old days too. Eastwood, James Dean, Mickey Dora's Wild Blue Pacific. Sammy Davis missed his White House visit, falling in love with the wrong color misses. Yeah, I miss the old days too. Tommy Smith's Olympic one-handed salute. Well, I never felt the need to rise up, did you? Maybe everybody doesn't miss the old days like we do.
There's a song on that record called Fentanyl about like the opioid epidemic.
Wide-eyed at the Atlantic tide. Maybe there's still something in there that I just can't find to match how I feel about you, leaving us behind beside the way I think you hurt too bad for too long. Yeah, I know you suffered too much for too long. I want a second chance to talk. I want a second chance for you. Maybe you'd find Jesus or a 12-step way through. I want a second chance to talk. I want a second chance for you. Help you find some help when I just never helped you. But there's no goodbye calls with fentanyl.
It's really tackling some things that were really heavy topics over COVID, or like hiding from things being scary. And there's a song called Highline about being in New York and how it's scary because there's so many people, and then New York shuts down
and it's empty, and it was just chilling.
Yeah,
I played it a lot on our. We do a Spotify weekly mix and have for years, and those songs were on there almost every week for that whole 2 years.
So hold me, keep me coming back to listen when I tell you that I'm not worried. Darkness, is it just an absence? Walk you to the highlight, a new day's coming. So hold me, keep me coming back to listen when I tell you that I'm not worried. Darkness, is it just an absence? Walk you to the highlight, a new day's coming.
A lot of people are saying what you're saying. Like I walked into parks and listened to that. Like there's a line in a song called Autumn Love, which is about my wife. This is like, it's a feeling I get that we're not there yet, but we can stay here for a while. And it's all about like this pause, and like that's about like being in the Northwest and fall hits, and there's this time of like waiting. It's just like waiting it out. Like we're just gonna hunker down and wait. So to me, that's what that meant. And then COVID happened. It's like, well, that's what we did that whole time. Is we just waited. We're not there, but we can wait.
It's a feeling I get that we're not done yet. We can stay here for a while.
You are doing stuff that's pretty asymmetrical at times. It's still at its core confessional, reflective, singer-songwriter music. It's taking this different kind of tone. So tell me how your songwriting and your approach to songwriting has evolved. How do you approach this this craft?
I think like I always start a song with like, I basically have like these notebooks and stuff where I'm just like writing down, I'll like write down a phrase or whatever, and it's like, I'll kind of like develop these little places in my brain, like I can tell you where every single one of my songs takes place physically. I can kind of like watch it form. Let me think of an example. There's a song on the new record that's called Time is a One-Way Mirror that took me like 7 months to write. And the way that I wrote that song was I had this really clear vision of like myself as an adult, like as a grown man sitting in a dark room, and I'm surrounded by all my childhood toys. So like I can remember like seeing like, this Lego set that I loved, and there you like these things that you forget. I don't know if you've ever like my dad, he got remarried and he moved, and he made me like go through all my old stuff, like come get your stuff, get your shit out of my house, basically. Right. And I looked through it and I was, this is incredible, because these are things that have like very significant emotional ties to me. Yeah. Like these little Lego guys that I had names for and stuff, like, oh my gosh, like, and I just saw all these toys like around me. And then, a friend of mine whose dad is one of these, like, who's the guy in Napoleon Dynamite, Uncle Rico, that's just talking about how bitchin' he used to be. Yeah, I could throw a football over that mountain. He's one of these guys, right? That's like
stuck in the past.
Yeah, stuck in the past, and he's walking, and he's bitter about how the future turned out. And I'm caught between the possibility of childhood and this bitter older version of what that can become. And I knew that I wanted to end it with, there was this gym at Washington State University, which is the college in the town where I grew up in. And there was this gym there that we could sneak into, and it was a gymnastics room. So it had like the mats and the pommel horses and the parallel bars and stuff. And, we would go in there and run around and do flips off the stuff into the mats. And there was a one-way mirror on the wall, so that like the judges could go in there and observe the gymnasts without them knowing. Oh. Really what I'm doing is I'm just sitting there playing the piano, and it's just like I'm just in this place. I'm just like, oh, here I am. And the first one was sitting on the ground surrounded by my Legos, and then the second one was I'm in that room, because you could get in there. It was usually locked, but sometimes you could get in. And it was in the belly of this giant gym on the college campus, and like down like 3 flights of stairs. And so I had this like vision of myself now watching my high school self in there playing on these mats, and what would I want to say to that person? Like what would I want to tell them? There's so many things. I think I was thinking a lot when I was making this record about those the no regrets tattoos. Yeah. I was like, how can you have no regrets? Like I understand not lingering on it, but of course you have regrets. Yeah. In fact, like I think that like sometimes like that mentality of like no regrets is like, because if you allow yourself to, it is a tidal wave of trouble for your current person. It's like, and I just imagine myself like screaming at this mirror to tell myself like, don't do this, like don't do that, like do this, and I'm like yelling at it, and that person's just in there doing somersaults. Yeah. My high school self with my stupid haircuts like doing somersaults on the mats, and I'm like desperately trying to convey something to him. And that I think comes from being the kid that I was, which is like I just read books all the time, and I had this incredibly like vivid and annoying imagination.
So tired of fighting, I stared at my hands all the way from the airport, like Benedict Arnold was living inside. Maybe he does, and maybe I am. I wanna go back and just shout through the void to change course, but there's no one there that can hear it, 'cause time is a one-way mirror. Time is a one-way mirror.
This album has so many elements of what are kind of nostalgia, looking back through that one-way mirror, but also very happy, but at the same time, there's a darkness. Like Wendy Darling, my gosh, I love this song. And the idea that it's the old men that say the decades don't pass slow, I'm thinking, are you not an old man at this point, or are you kind of counting yourselves? Are you feeling a little bit of your oats at this point?
Down the street to go to Max's party. Driving like Magnum's Ferrari. Throwing up your mom's love Bacardi. The whole school thought the vodka had gone bad. Didn't drink till we went to college. My best friend took the anabolics. I worked up my nerve to call you. The old men say the decades don't pass slow. The old men say the decades don't pass slow.
Hide from the World is one of my favorite songs of this whole year. I'm obsessed with this song. And I can relate to it as someone who's comfortable dealing with crowds and being in a crowd and managing a crowd, but also somebody who essentially needs to be alone sometimes. But you take it and you're being very honest about how alone you need to be.
I want to hang in Snoopy's doghouse, and he should be there too. Make believe the Red Baron and kick it with the Charlie Brown crew. I want to go in Oscar's trash can down on Sesame Street. A guy in such a bad mood could really understand me. I wanna hide from the world, from the world. I wanna hide from the world, from the world. I wanna hide from the world.
You seem to be doing something with nostalgia here. Did you set off at the beginning to say, I'm going to do a whole batch of songs about this? Or were you just writing songs and later looked and saw this pattern kind of emerging?
I knew I wanted to make a record about adulthood. And that was sort of where it all stemmed from. I mean, even like the title is Milk Teeth, which is, you know, it's our baby teeth, and it's the first things we lose on the like journey towards our eventual demise or adulthood in the middle there. I am a nostalgic person, like by to a fault, certainly. You know, I'm sentimental and I'm nostalgic, and I think that part of that is because I think that like there are little vignettes of our past that are things that we should keep with us. You know, they're like important to who we are, and I think that like the looking backwards into ourselves is a good way to capture the things that mean the most to us. You know, like why does this? I'm trying to think of a good example, but like there's tons of my music where it's like this little scene of me like riding in the back of a pickup truck full of pillows or something. So why is that important to me? You know, it's important because like it was wild and it was safe and it was young and it was moving on and it was a moment in time that was very specifically and very clearly passing. So that's always something that I've done, and I think I think it's good to look backwards and to note why you felt the way that you felt and why that's important. And there's a German term that basically means that nostalgia is a mental illness. Right. For one thing, it's because it's a lie. You know, like there's none of that stuff's real. I mean, it is real, but it's also like as you get older, you invent these versions of the past that are romanticized and are uncomplicated. You know, and they feel simple and they feel like there becomes this pining, this yearning for it. And it's like, first of all, you can't have it again, and second of all, it wasn't even real then. So I kind of was asking myself, like, as an adult now, why am I this way? And I think what I kind of ended up landing on was that definition of insanity. That's like insanity is trying the same thing over and over and expecting different results. I think like the two different versions of adulthood are people that like kind of embody responsibility in a way that's really beautiful. You know, people that care for their community and their families and their friends and are not like slipping past the things that are needed and called upon of them. Right. And then there's the other version that is and then at the same time, a lot of the times those people have lost the wonder of childhood. You know, they're doing the thing that needs to be done, and they're leaned upon and they're loved, but they're not able to like discover things the way that they were. And then there's the people that are able to kind of have that wonder, but they're just like, they're just sort of like weights upon the people around them. You know, they haven't embodied the beauty of adulthood. And I wanted to find a way to like, how do we do both? Like, how do we like become a person that is reliable and beneficial and like basically worthy of like the weight of adulthood without losing all of that wonder and like the ability to discover and you know, feel new things.
In the old downtown, in the vacant houses, empty lots filled with wildflowers. You put a plywood bed in a Dodge Ram tradesman and parked it outside the American Legion. You took me down to see the ocean as the winds begin to change. With the back doors open, your head on my shoulder, and all the things I would not change. But you never gave up, like the good was good enough, right up to the minute of what you always saw coming.
A song like Carlo Rossi, I was thinking, okay, so you got cheap wine, you got these winsome, nostalgic memories about stuff that's pretty reckless, you know, and also another just ridiculously catchy melody. Are you doing some subversion with these lyrics where it's like you're tricking us into feeling winsome about these things, but then there's also kind of a dark lining to this stuff?
Totally. I think, well, for one thing too, like I think that like good art in general like doesn't behave very well. You know, there's like there has to be an edge to it, or it's just like, I think that's the case for pop music too. It's like if there's not something that's a little bit twisted and broken in it, it's like it's not really saying anything very important.
Right.
Obviously that's a generalization, but
well, it's the difference between art and decoration. You know,
yeah, totally.
Is it just wallpaper or is it a painting? You know, like there's. It's not that there's anything wrong with decoration. It's just like, what are you trying to accomplish?
I think that's so good. I'm going to use that, art and decoration. That's really good. In the case of like Carlo Rossi, that song is like I said, like there's a place for all my songs or whatever, and that one takes like place in Central America, like when there's riots happening.
Yeah.
So, you know, you're like, it's this young couple, and they're clearly like in love, and they're having a great time. You know, they're smoking cigarettes and drinking cheap wine and breaking into hotel rooms and hiding in the trees and stuff. And then meanwhile, it's like the line in that song that kind of turned the corner for me is, and it says like your head back to hell with the ambulance. It's like these people that are like having an awesome time, and an ambulance drives by, and they're singing along with the siren while they're partying, you know? And it's like, well, if an ambulance is driving by, then somebody got hurt,
right?
You know, like, and maybe like you shouldn't be having such a good time. And it's like this couple is having the time of their lives, and like the world is burning down. And also that whole song is inspired by a John Steinbeck novel where they called Cannery Row.
And that gets to this thing we talk about all the time with songwriters, that this generality or universality and specificity. We can get to these little bitty details and then find that it becomes really relevant to a lot of people, because we can all relate to these specific things because we're all so similar.
Well, and for me, like that was the fun thing about that song specifically, was that I got married during COVID. So it was this chaotic time. Like my wife was blocked she's Canadian, so she was like locked on the other side of the Canadian border, and the music business is not existent, and I don't know if I have a living anymore, and I don't know if anything exists. And meanwhile, we're like sending memes to each other and laughing about it, and sort of like having a great time. Like we're in love, and we're like, but it's a nightmare, and we have to like figure out how to pay for lawyers and how to get her across the border and how to have a wedding, and it was terrifying. And also like, and I think like that split of being like, So does this mean that the world, that like our moment in time isn't terrible? It's like, no, it is. And is it also like beautiful?
We're De Los Muertos skeletons. Head back to hell with the ambulance. Climb up the banyan root. Here comes the Smokies too. Tell everyone to go home. But where did I go right to have you like this? Where did I go right to have you like this?
Musically, are you just writing this stuff by ear, or did you, for instance, Hide from the World, if I'm not mistaken, you're changing modality. You're going from a major key to either a diminished or a minor. Like, even in the scale you're using, you're changing the tonality or the modality between the verse and the chorus. The notes you're using, you're sliding around. It's almost referencing things like Steely Dan in terms of going into jazzy stuff. Where are you getting this vocabulary? Because it's definitely next level, I think, when it comes to sophistication. And what instrument are you writing this stuff on? It doesn't sound like songs that are written on a guitar, for instance.
Yeah, that's interesting that you referenced Steely Dan, because especially the past few years, like, I've revisited a bunch, actually the music my dad liked. I actually just did a podcast with my friend about where we unpacked yacht rock for like 3 hours. It's so lame and so awesome. Yeah. But yeah, I mean, a lot of it, I actually wrote and recorded the record twice. And I recorded it twice. So I have this little studio in town that's like in the steeple of this old church. And there's actually some pretty great stuff in there. But a lot of it is written on, I found a whole bunch of really weird old keyboards and synthesizers at this thrift store. They're all like $30 each, and I just like loaded this place up with these old keyboards that barely work. Some of them I had to like pull them apart to get them to like even play. There's some songs that are guitar for sure. There's probably like 5 songs that are written on guitar, or like probably 4 songs on guitar and like 3 on piano, and then where the idea started there. But then a lot of it's on those old keyboards and drum machines and stuff too. Like Windy Darling, for instance, is like a rock band song. So it's like that started with like a drum machine thing. And then that like doo-doo, and then that little hook part. So. Oh
man, and that little sampled horn kind of sound, just that simple little sound. That just takes you to like 1984.
Yeah.
And then it's gone again. It's just like pops in and then it's gone again. It pops in. It's so well placed. Those little sounds, little ear candy. Never enough to distract from the composition, but certainly enough to add color in ways that it's just over and over on my headphones. It keeps me from getting tired of it.
Yeah.
I just can't stop listening to it.
I'm glad to hear that. I mean, like the whole, that I also have to I wrote the whole, I recorded the whole record in my studio, and it was like, and so all the movement, like all that weird modality stuff, and like there's like lots of key changes on the record and stuff, and even like most of the hooks and the parts were written. But I found this kid who was in. I have to give credit to this person because at least half of the record is due to him. But it's this. He's like 20. How old was he when I met him? He's probably 23 years old, and he lives in Orange County. His name is Nathan Semino.
I was going to ask you who this kid is.
He's so important to this process. In fact, he would hate that I'm telling people this, but he's a producer, but I convinced him to run front of house for these shows. So he's here right now, actually. He's not a front of house engineer, but I just was like trying to get him to come on tour because I love him. And he was like, I'm never doing front of house again, but he's running sound for us tonight in Nashville. But yeah, he's like 23, and I heard this record that he made, this band called Baseball Game, who I also stole their lead singer to be my guitar player for this tour. But they're
well done.
Somebody sent it to me, and I was like, it was like production wise, I was like, I'd never heard anything like it. What he was making, it feels so new to me, and like also timeless, but like just like there's like a lot of saturation. It's like and crazy tape loops and stuff. Like the textures that this kid is coming up with, I'm like, I've never heard anything like this in my life.
Right.
So I just called. I kind of like I got his email and just like sent him a cold email.
Oh, really?
And I was like, hey, do you want to do this record with me? And he was like, whoa, definitely. So I like drove up to Orange County. I met with him, and like we produced it together. But a lot of the sound, like the parts are most of them are me. And even like I played the bass on most of this record, and a lot of the guitars and some of the keyboards and stuff. But the textures and the sonics and like kind of the juice, like the magic, a lot of it, like most of that is Nathan.
Hammer on, can't break through. 10 years from Monte Cristo, 19 for Andy Dufresne too. We're gonna make it work out. We're gonna make it work out. This time everything has gotta change. All of the old crowd is gonna stay the same. Just drinking at the old bars whose names have changed.
This record doesn't have a lot of that like Dylan-esque like tackling of social issues. Whether that's like, you know, within the church, like I did a little bit, or that's with, you know, with the opioids and racism and all, you know, all these different things. And part of the reason why that's the case is because like when I got to this record, I was kind of like, man, we've had enough a little bit, you know, like I think like I always want to push back on like what I think is happening. And with that record, it was like, we're a little too comfortable. I need to like kind of shake the cage here a little bit. Wow. And on this record, I was like, you know what, we've had enough of that. Like I kind of want to make something that is about moving on and embodying the people and the future that we want to have. It's not like, I'm not like telling you to like get better. It's like, it's a little bit of like, or telling me, all of that stuff's for me too, you know? Mm-hmm. But it's like, it's really way more about like, hey, look how far we've come. There's a song called Buyer Confidence on the record. And it's like, that to me is sort of the answer to all the questions I'm asking on the album, which is like, well, then what do we do? Mm-hmm. Cause it just felt like coming out of that season, it was also like this like wild time of like trying to reinvigorate ourselves to go out. It's like, okay, we're free, you know? And for me in my mind, like during COVID, I figured like, man, when that happens, like it's going to be like spring in the Northwest. It's going to be the roaring 20s. Everybody's going to be out ripping, and it's going to be like joy in the streets. And then we got here and everybody's just sort of tired and beat up and sad and angry, man. And like everybody's lost people, and we've, you know, the economy's all jacked up, and people are scared about the future. And it's like, it's not this joyous like arrival that I think we all expected. It's actually like, it's like we're kind of coming in with our hat in our hands a little bit. And I saw that coming a little bit, and I was like, I don't think I need, it's like, I don't want to like be pointing fingers right now. You know, I'm sure I will again one day, but right now I'm like, let's just kind of like look back at our childhoods and look forward into our adulthoods, and like give ourselves a little bit of a license to just like not to like just let ourselves be who we are, with this like drive towards being the best versions of ourselves that we can in the future.
Well, if growing up is learning things are not the way you wish. Tiger hanging by his seatbelt. Wrong side up, down in the ditch. I'll disappoint the disappointment. Fail to fail, defeat, defeat. Yeah, believe in the believing. The kind of hero that I need.
You seem to be a part of a scene that we had always wanted to see, but never really imagined we were going to see, in that you're affiliated with Tooth and Nail Records. You know, Tooth and Nail, famous in the 90s and 2000s for, music from the Christian world. And it never used to be possible to this idea that you could be a person of faith and make music that was available to everybody was other than U2 or a handful of artists who just did it in the mainstream. It just wasn't possible.
Tooth and Nail was, when they first came to the table, I was like, oh, not them. Because in my mind, it was like they did Under Oath or whatever. Like they did like hardcore and MXPX and stuff, which I grew up on that stuff, and I love a lot of that stuff. It's great. And
they launched Pedro the Lion,
which actually later on that was actually one of the things, was that when I talked to them on the phone, they were like, we like really think that you could be a good fit here. And then we talked a lot about like Damien Jurado and Pedro the Lion, and even like Me Without You. But yeah, as far as the scene stuff goes, that's something that I'm really trying to figure out, because in my mind, like, it's just, we're in the Wild West right now. It makes even like the idea of buzz and what's happening, that's even like, just because there's so much stuff happen, there's so much music being put out, and there's not these, like, the thing that's really been hard for me is the way that I always saw music happening and working growing up in the Northwest was that there's these regional scenes that support each other. There's there's these 40 bands in Seattle that all play at the Crocodile and at the Triple Door or whatever, and at the at the Tractor, and these clubs in the Sunset and all these places that the bands play, and you go to each other's shows and you play on each other's records and you go on tour together. And so as a young artist, I was like, that's what will happen if I do this or whatever, is that like there will be this group of people. And it just feels like if it was little ponds, it's like they kind of like we're all one giant ocean now, And there are a lot of people that are doing really interesting things. Like Maddie Cunningham played here last night, and she sang on Someday I'll Make It All To You, and her and her husband Austin are like friends of ours, and she grew up as a like pastor's kid and is now like arguably the best guitarist in the country and crushing it, and doesn't sing about that stuff so much, a little bit, but she's definitely from that world. Or you've got like the Watkins from Nickel Creek. I was joking about like the guys in my band here are like, a lot of them are like road dogs, like guys that play with tons of artists and are like amazing, and all of them grew up like either homeschooled or close to it, playing in church.
Yeah,
that's why they're so good, because they were
it's funny how that happens.
Yeah, they were playing in church when they were like 9 years old or 10 years old or whatever, and now they're just monsters.
Right.
So a lot of people in the music industry are that way. But it isn't like, I am trying to figure out like what, like where do I live? Like where do we live, And that is something that is, we have lost that, I think, like the regional thing that was so important to me as a kid. It just feels like it's all happening at once because we're all living in the internet or whatever. But I think like the place that I've landed with it is that the freedom, the frustrating thing about it is that like the camaraderie of coming up together and like existing together. I have my crew, my people in San Diego that are amazing and are doing all sorts of cool stuff. But it's definitely different. But the freedom to it, though, I think, is that it does allow you to be, I get to be like as honest as I want to be about who I am. I can say like, look, I'm a person of faith, and I sing about that stuff sometimes. And also, that's not like the entirety of who I am as an artist. I get to sing about other stuff too. I think that has been really positive, to be able to say like, I can just be who I am.
So if I'm being honest, if I'm being honest,
you seem to be willing to tackle some kind of mental health issues. How personal and confessional is that, and how has mental health awareness and issues related to that? You've talked already about learning disabilities and things like that, but how is that factored into your creativity and the way you approach your art?
The first song on the record is called Oh No, which is supposed to be like it's like kind of a song version of what having a panic attack feels like, which is something that I have gone through a lot, and the different different amounts of how severe that is or whatever over the past 7 years or something. So that basically I would just wake up in the middle of the night and be on a rocket ship to Mars. And at the same time, I have a lot of friends that have real, not to say that's not real, it's definitely real, but I have friends that have bipolar disorder and friends that are medicated for anxiety and things like that. And I guess I think that one thing that I found is that when you sort of tackle stuff like that straight on, it actually is comforting to people.
Right.
I think people, when people hear that, they're like, oh man, I'm not the only one that wakes up at 3 a.m. and feels like, the box has been lifted off my head and I can see that everything in the world is dangerous. Every night on this tour, somebody will come up to me that happens to me, and thank you for saying that or whatever. So, yeah, I think that the mental health stuff is at least as big, if not a bigger issue than anything else I've written about on all of my records. It's it's a giant problem. And it does feel like, we are all sort of infected with something that is worry, and also, well beyond worry.
Right.
So I think trying to bring, part of your job as an artist is to try to shine light on things that try to they said that academia is taking something simple and making it complicated, and an art is taking something complicated and making it simple. And, I think that has been helpful for people. In fact, that song, it's crazy, but more people stream Oh No than they stream Carlo Rossi.
Oh no, I'm awake again. 3 a.m, can't catch my breathing, my heart and it's beating. Oh no, guess I'll go back outside. On the porch, mostly naked again, while our police captain neighbors are up getting wasted. I know.
Even the title Milk Teeth and the idea, I love that you choose milk teeth instead of baby teeth, because there's a reason God gives us practice teeth first. We would kill each other if we were given the real thing. There's elements of other kinds of mental health issues. You're willing to do that in ways that most people in the past have not, unless they're making fun of it or making a joke about it. Do you think that art plays a role in mental health and healing and recovery, and in your life, has it had a therapeutic effect to tackle these things? Without question.
And I actually think even beyond that, I think that the current state, a lot of the reason why a lot of people are a lot of mental illness right now, I think is actually driven by things that are beyond people's control. I think that the state of society and technology and the way that we talk to each other and all these things are huge causes of that. And I think that it's actually something that I always push back with in this town, specifically in Nashville, is that Nashville a lot of times is asking the questions well, what will be successful? What will sell?
Right.
And in my mind, it's you guys are artists, musicians, filmmakers, authors, are sort of the ones driving the ship. Culture, policy, everything follows art. It always has. And so it's well, if you're kind of following, it's where are we going? Trying to have that sense of where are we going? Where do you think? What's the whatever audience or whatever power you have? Where do you think that we should be going? And so I actually think that in some ways, art is the healing of a lot of things, not only on a personal level, but on a more meta level, on a societal level. It's the thing that makes the stuff better, It's why it's why I didn't do a lot of tearing down on milk teeth like I did on Someday I'll Make It All Up to You. It's like, because that wasn't what I thought we needed. Not to say that I'm like the savior or an expert or anything, but I think there is a responsibility to making things, like having some sort of vision. Like, if people are going to listen, what do you want them to listen to?
Right. Thank you for sharing that. I really appreciate that.
I don't think that it's too much to ask. We all give a little, and we all get a little back. I like a worm with a man who sold me this, that I bought in for a future, declining by your confidence. But I don't think that it's too much to ask, that it all gets a little better with the days that pass. And I like a world with a man who sold us this, bought it for a future with declining by your confidence. Just let me down easy, just let me down. Let me down easy, just let me down. Let me down easy, just let me down. Let me down easy, just let me down.
Thank you for being with us today.
Yeah.
And thank you for sharing all this stuff. And thank you for these albums. It's a lot of work.
It's a privilege to make them, yeah.
As I pull out my soapbox to wrap this up, I'm thinking a bit more about Tyson's concept of milk teeth or baby teeth and his comments about the things we lose when we hit adulthood. I can be quite nostalgic at times, especially when it comes to music, though I definitely would never want to go back to my own personal childhood again. But I wonder if there's something in that nostalgia that should worry me. Everywhere I look, I see products designed to tap into my nostalgia, be it a nebulous hunger for the good old days, the way things used to be, in some possibly mythological past in which things were better, or maybe the slew of movies and reunion tours designed to sell me stuff that I loved when I was a kid. It's like there's a whole industry out there dedicated to making me keep my milk teeth and to neglect my adult teeth. It seems to me that one of the biggest problems with our community is that many of us so-called grown-ups seem unwilling to let go of our childishness. We don't want meat. We don't want to be challenged, to discern truth from fiction, to do the hard work. We just want to be told we are right and sold some reboots of the movies and albums and comics that we already love. Many of us become downright angry when our comfortable way of life is challenged. That doesn't seem like growth to me. That doesn't seem like what great art wants to do in my heart and mind. Most of us know 1 Corinthians 13, whether we consider ourselves to be Christians or not. It's called the love chapter for good reason. And if you've ever been to a wedding, you've probably heard part or all of it read aloud. But after this conversation, I am really hung up on the ending. It's kind of a good news, bad news ending, I think, because Paul admits that when he was a child, he talked, thought, and reasoned like a child, but when he grew up, he put childish ways behind him. Then he connected that kind of growth to the way we as spiritual people only see spiritual things partially now, like in a dirty mirror, but we have faith that someday we will understand those things, we will comprehend them, as if we were seeing them face to face. We know things now partly, but someday we will understand them fully. We'll lose our milk teeth. Then he ends that section with the promise that in the end, now, these three things remain: faith, hope, and love. But that the greatest, or most important of those things, is love. What does the putting away of childishness have to do with the greatest remaining thing being love? I think that maybe, if we don't learn how to grow up, how to get our adult teeth, how to discern faith and hope and love, how to look in a dirty mirror for the fragments of truth and find the patterns, we'll miss out on love altogether. We become sitting ducks for those who would tempt us to go back to our childish ways, those who would tempt us to sell our birthright for beans or to put down our cross and pick up a crossbow. I love that great music can help me think about things like this if I let it. The question remains, what do I do now? I don't know about you, but I'm striving after love. Okay, I'm climbing off my soapbox now. That's going to do it for this episode of the True Tunes podcast. Thanks to Tyson Motsenbocker for his time and for sending us some really cool, rare music to add to the show. You can find a complete list of all of the music used on this episode and some great links as well on the show notes page. Make sure to pick up a copy of Tyson's new album, Milk Teeth, and his previous album, Someday I'll Make It All Up to You. And if this is your first time joining us here on the podcast, welcome. We've got over 80 previous episodes waiting for you to discover, featuring conversations with a wide range of artists, songwriters, filmmakers, and others from different genres and generations, all willing to explore the deep end of the creative pool. I've been exploring these themes since I founded the original True Tunes record store and magazine over 30 years ago, and it's really exciting to hear how younger artists like Tyson or many of the others we've had or will have on the show fit into this larger story. You can find the entire catalog of episodes on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Podbean, and many other platforms. Thanks also to Phil Keggy and Rex Paul for our theme song, the special instrumental mix of Full Circle. Phil continues to put out incredible new and classic music through his Keggy's Garage Bandcamp page. We'll link to it on the show notes page as well, but check it out. Amazing stuff. Please remember to check out our weekly Spotify mix, subscribe to our email list, leave us a rating and review at Apple Podcast, and tell your friends about the show. We've got some new True Tunes t-shirts, stickers, buttons, and pins available, so check those out too. And if you'd like to support the show, please drop by patreon.com/TrueTunes. And if you'd like to have me come speak in your neck of the woods, let me know. We're also looking for sponsors, so if you have a book or film or conference or something else that you would like to promote to the coolest podcast audience in the world, let me know. This podcast was written and produced by me, JJT, with co-production, editing, and sound design by Bruce A. Brown for Gyroscope Productions. The contents of the program are protected by U.S. copyright law and are the intellectual property of Gyroscope Productions, with the exception of songs or clips that are from previously copywritten materials. Everything on this episode is used by permission or under fair use provisions. Thoughts and opinions of our guests do not represent the positions of our producers or our sponsors. Discernment is always recommended. This program is intended for the private use of our listening audience. Gyroscope Productions can be reached at jjt@truetunes.com or P.O. Box 60401, Nashville, Tennessee 37206. Until next time, this is JJT reminding you all to stay tuned and stay true. Peace. Tyson Motsenbocker, thank you for being with us here on the True Tunes podcast.
Yeah, thanks for having me on.
Forgot to hit record, so there's a whole section there that people that are our patrons on Patreon are going to see on the video.
That part was no good anyway. I'm sorry.
Good news, boppers. The big alert has been called off. It turns out that the early reports were wrong. All wrong. Now, for that group out there that had such a hard time getting home, sorry about that.